Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Transformers Legacy, something which is going to take me so long to actually get used to because I've been saying War for Cybertron trilogy for the best part of 3 years. But this is of course the Transformers Legacy Deluxe class Skids, our first entry into this brand new lineup, and if I'm being completely honest, I think the line has got off to a slightly rocky start. Some of the actual promotional images that we've been shown of these guys didn't leave a lasting impression on me, and considering the War for Cybertron line gave us some of the best mainline figures that we've seen at least in the past decade, Legacy definitely has a lot to live up to. But of course we're going to be taking a look here at Skids today, a pretty decent character to in fact actually start off with, so let's see of course how he does indeed shape up. So for the most part this guy of course takes direct inspiration from how he appeared in the original G1 series. As we saw from the War for Cybertron line, of course there are some areas of which are a little more stylized, most noticeably would be the surface detailing. They've got a lot more sculpt work when in comparison to how they actually appeared on screen, and in terms of plastic this guy feels great. Honestly, I think it's a really well made figure, but in terms of design, I just don't think it holds up as well. You can see that in regards to the head sculpt, straight away we're off to a bad start. Skids has got this massive block just hanging out of the back. This does not look the best at all, and in all honesty, well, something that I noticed straight away when we saw some of those official images, I'm really hoping that this is not the standard that we're expecting to see, as to me, this reminds me of some of those older Combiner Wars, Power of the Prime figures of, let's be honest, weren't the best, so really hoping that this is just a one-off. But you can see the detailing isn't too bad there to the face sculpt. It's been painted really nicely, and you'll actually notice the shade of blue they've used. I mistakenly took it for paint upon first glance, but it is indeed glossy plastic. It looks really nicely done, definitely very thick and durable and looks fantastic. You can see we've got the Autobot insignia slap bang there in the center, some lovely detailing going on here for the front chest section. Does it look slightly too blocky? I personally think so, but once again I guess that could just be a minor critique. We've got the doors here off to the sides. Of course you could bring them forwards if you want. Personally I like to flare them out, it just gives a little bit more of a dynamic look to this guy. But you can see in terms of the shoulder design, I think this has turned out pretty nicely. The arms do in fact reverse for transformation, so you can see very nice looking sculpt work here for the forearms. Doesn't look too bad. Not a huge fan of this big port that we've got going on here for the front, but of course this is so that he can indeed actually hold his weapons as shown on the show. So you can see there pretty nice looking sculpt work going on for the fists. As we turn our attention down to the lower region, once more some nice sculpt work, but then as we begin to look here at the legs, honestly it's just a train wreck. You can just see how hollow this is. Literally, this horrified me when we saw some of those in-hand images. This literally looks as if though it's been taken straight out of some of those 2015, 2016 era of figures. This is not what I expect of modern Transformers at all. You can see they've tried their best to in fact apply some sculpt work in there, but that is just way too deep of a hole, and you can just see all of this here looks super ugly. I guess you could say from a front-on perspective it's not all that visible, but in all honesty, who's really going to display their figure with the legs dead straight? You're always going to have them at a slight angle, and there is literally just no avoiding that at all. But the thighs have been completely coated here in a nice metallic silver. That does go all the way around until we sadly get to the back, but that's probably due to transformation. You can see we've got some nice sculpt work going on here towards the rear, which doesn't look too bad. Of course, we've got this section of the vehicle mode, which is in fact accurate, and we have surprisingly actually got some sculpt work here for the inside of the doors, which is a pretty nice touch. And then finally, as we take a look here towards the shins, once more some really nice sculpt work. The feet, I'm not entirely sure whether or not it's because they've been cast out of this solid red, but they do look rather clown-like. They definitely look very large, and once again, maybe if they could have painted this section here black just so that the front toe was red, I think that maybe would have looked slightly better. One thing that I'm only just noticing is that the wheels can in fact actually compress within the feet, so just note that whilst I'm in fact actually talking through the robot mode segment, I completely missed that. So of course for bot mode they're supposed to store like that, and for transformation they would indeed click out like that. But you can see some nice sculpt as well as paintwork going on here for the side. So overall, in terms of the actual robot mode design, there are definitely some problems here. You can also see some hollowness here to the actual torso. Honestly, in hand it doesn't look as bad as shown in some of those pictures, but once again isn't the best. I do wish, however, that some of the future figures are a little better than this. I really do find that back panel on the head a major deal breaker, as so as some of those hollow spaces here for the legs. But articulation wise, surprisingly pretty pack load. So here for the head is on a ball joint. This can rotate the full 360, look up and down and tilt side to side slightly. Of course you saw earlier on the doors are on hinge joints, so can hinge out to the sides. Full rotation here at the shoulder, although one thing worth mentioning is that due to how tight the actual shoulder joints are, if you haven't got a grip here of the torso, 9 times out of 10 these shoulders will in fact actually take that entire torso joint with it. The connection that actually locks this here into this is not the best, so once again that is definitely not a great sign. But of course they can rotate the full 360, hinge out to the sides here on this pin joint. These don't in fact actually lock into place, so will continuously actually droop down if you don't in fact actually force them upwards. We do get a rotation here at the bicep, 90 there at the actual elbow, both. We do in fact surprisingly get a wrist rotation, which I wasn't expecting, so this can rotate the full 360. We do get a full rotation here at the waist. The legs can kick forward to that far, as well as can kick back to that far, which is pretty decent. Of course, out to the sides, rotation at the thigh, and then we turn our attention to the knee joint. This has got to be one of the ugliest joints I've seen for a very, very long time. You can see here that it just looks so strange, and I hate the fact that the shin pad actually sticks out. To me, that just looks super unnatural from pretty much any angle that you have this displayed at. It just looks really, really odd. So once again, not the best design there in my opinion. And then of course, finally, we do get the War for Cybertron traditional ankle rocker pivot, which can in fact actually bend to a fair amount. So that's pretty decent. So articulation wise, definitely on par with what we saw from the War for Cybertron lineup. But in terms of the engineering, especially where those knees are concerned, it's once again not looking the best. And for those of you wondering, you can in fact actually take this back section here, raise it slightly higher if you wish for the windscreen to be visible, or of course can compress it down to your own personal desire. Now in regards to accessories, actually comes with quite a few. So we get the traditional G1 weapon. You can see there, completely cast out of black plastic but painted in silver. That looks really nice. You can see very nice looking sculpt work. As mentioned beforehand, you can peg it into the 5mm ports that are on the forearms or in the hands. Personally, I like to snap it there into the hands. I think that looks slightly cooler. Of course, we get this blaster here, which doesn't look too bad either. You can see some nice sculpt work, albeit I find the handle just to be way too long. If we actually peg this here into the hand, you can see how it literally just juts out. Doesn't look the best once more. And I do believe that Legacy's all-new gimmick is in fact these energon-infused weapons. So Skids does come with this blue transparent weapon, which is supposed to resemble an axe here in this form, and then when we combine it with the other two, it does become a blaster. You can see nice looking sculpt work, but in all honesty, not really an accessory that I care that much about. Would have much rather than found a way to in fact actually conceal that panel. But just to show you how this does look as an axe, we can just peg that in there like so. Transparent plastics, so definitely be cautious of how much force you're applying, but doesn't look too bad as an axe. But once more, you can combine all three of the weapons, which is pretty cool. So just to showcase that off very quickly, you simply want to take this here, peg this onto the underside, and I guess that's why the actual tab here is so long, so that when you do have them combined, it doesn't actually compromise the grip. And then finally, we take this energon weapon, peg this here directly over the top, and that actually isn't a bad looking blaster by any stretch of the imagination. So we can just snap that in there, and you can see there we've got Skids with his all-new energon-infused weapon. Once again, looking pretty cool. Size comparison-wise, here we have Legacy Skids compared next to the War for Cybertron Bumblebee, as well as Sideswipe, and you can see scales pretty nicely. I will, however, say that I find in terms of the design, he's not as streamlined as the likes of Sideswipe. There is just something about the design that I just find to be slightly out of scale when in comparison to the rest of the figures. He just looks slightly too chunky. Now, granted, of course, he was a very blocky character in the show, but when you do compare him to the other G1 characters, I just think that the style is ever so slightly off. It could just be me, but personally, that's what I'm actually finding when comparing these two guys. And one thing I will note, however, is that he does feel very hefty. He's definitely, by no stretch of the imagination, a light and flimsy Deluxe. He's very solid. You can see as we turn our attention here to the side, roughly the same in terms of Sideswipe, but from a front-on perspective, I do just find him to be ever so slightly out of proportion when in comparison to some of these other figures. Here he is alongside the Earthrise Netflix Optimus Prime, Kingdom's Rodimus Prime, and finally here he is alongside his recently released Masterpiece offering. And honestly, I actually don't think they're too bad. I think they came pretty close in actually capturing the design, but you can just see, of course, the Masterpiece is just bigger in terms of scale overall, but I do just find him to be slightly more slender, slightly more streamlined in terms of design. This particular Legacy Skids seems a little too chunky, a little too squat. So I do think that there is just something slightly off about the proportions on this guy. Please let me know down in the comment section below if you think it's just me, or do you in fact actually agree with me. I do just think that he looks slightly too stocky. The chest looks a little too big when in comparison to the rest of the body. The doors look slightly out of proportion, and I definitely think that the actual shins sit way too high when in proportion with the thighs as well. So I do think there's something slightly off, but you can see in terms of the design, they have captured pretty much all of the major assets that would carry over from the actual G1 design. Now, turning to transformation, pretty simple if I do say so myself. It's very similar to some of those pre-War for Cybertron figures. Age of Extinction characters definitely come to mind. He is, to me, a little too simplified, but we'll go through it, of course. So to begin with, you are in fact going to want to just hinge the arms out here to the side, come here to this section, just hinge this back to get it out of the way. We can then disengage this plate here and just lift this entire section over, and you can see how that panel will fill out this gap here in the front hood. We can then come here to the shins, just fold these sections down, simply just snap them there into place, and essentially you're just going to want to disengage this joint here, so just snap that like so, and at the same time in fact actually hinge these hip joints down, so just hinge everything like this. We can then come to these arms. You're going to want to rotate these in like so, and then take the bicep, rotate that, as these here are going to come in, and you can see how we've got these tiny little tabs that will in fact peg into some slots on the underside here of the arm. So just hinge this here all the way down until that does lock into place. Of course, come to this side, repeat the same process. So just hinge that out, bring this section in, and of course down. And then finally, what you're going to want to do here is take this windscreen. You can see we've got two very tiny transparent tabs. They are going to peg into those slots there. So just rock this section here back until it does snap there into place. And then finally, we can just take these knee joints and hinge those up. And you can see that we've got that circular port that will in fact actually overlap on this red section. So just tuck that under, and there is indeed some tiny little tabs, you may be able to see them here, that will in fact actually peg into some slots here on the roof. So once again, just snap those into place. You can see we've got a tab there that will peg there into that slot, so snap that in. Snap that section in, and there we have the Legacy Skids fully transformed up into his fairly faithful Honda Turbo City Alt mode. For the most part, actually not looking too bad at all. I don't have nowhere near as many qualms here as I do in robot mode, but before we delve into that, engineering wise, way too simplistic, definitely a step in the wrong direction when in comparison to some of the very sleek and sophisticated transformations that we were seeing at the Deluxe class price point for some of those War for Cybertron offerings. I do just think this guy is a back to basics. Definitely reminds me once more of some of those older Power of the Primes Titan's Return figures. Definitely not what I would be wanting when handling some of those figures from the past 3 chapters, but nevertheless, to get stuck straight here into the details, I do still find him to have a slight proportion issue. I do think the windscreen is slightly too large and that the roof sits slightly too high, resembling more of a van when in comparison to the Honda City Turbo. That could just be something that I'm seeing. Once again, please feel free to let me know down in the comment section below whether or not you agree with me on that, but you can see here for the skull work, very similar to what we actually saw in bot mode, so not much new here, but it looks really nicely done, especially the red detailing as well as this great detailing. As we spin our attention here to the side, really nice details, especially these red and silver stripes. You can see there the handle picked out as well as these side view mirrors, and once again, I'm a huge fan of the transparent blue plastic that we've got going on here for the windows as well as front windscreen. This entire piece here is in fact a transparent section in order to in fact actually give us this sky view window, which is a really nice touch, and you can see this is in fact paint, whereas this is cast blue plastic. Personally, I think they've done a spot on job with the color match. Of course, it is in fact under intense lighting here of the review station. In all honesty, in hand, you cannot tell the difference at all. This is by far one of the best color matches I've seen them do for quite some time, and as we take a look here towards the door, this too is transparent plastic with painted blue. You can see literally there is no difference here between the cast plastic and paint. They've done a really nice job. As we turn here to the side, you can see we've got where of course you would insert the gas, which looks pretty nice. This faux window doesn't look the best, but as we spin our attention here to the back, pretty bland, pretty void of any paint at all. Literally it's just cast blue plastic, so some red tail lights definitely wouldn't have gone amiss, or maybe if they could have just painted the license plate in white, that would have looked pretty cool. They didn't even deck out here the actual tail lights, so that definitely is lazy. Once again, bringing some memories back to some of those older figures. But as we spin here to the base, you can see once again pretty tightly compact, but with a very simplistic conversion. He does roll very, very nicely. One thing I will mention, however, is that this roof is such a pain in the behind to in fact actually get tabbed in, and due to this being transparent, I really don't like applying that much force to it. So you are supposed to really grip it, and you can see it just wants to keep forcing its way up. It's not a massive deal breaker. Once again, could just be an isolated issue here on my copy, but definitely just be wary of that. In terms of accessory storage, we can take this Energon infused axe, just snap that here onto the top. Personally, I think this here looks ridiculous. We can also take some of the other weapons, such as this blaster, snap this here onto the side, and the same can also be said here for this weapon, so we can just peg it in here along the side, just like so. Here for some vehicle comparisons, we've got Legacy Skids compared next to Earthrise Prime. Here he is alongside Bumblebee, just so you can see how these two figures fare, as well as the Kingdom Earth mode sideswipe, so you can just see how those two look together. And finally, comparing Legacy Skids alongside his Masterpiece counterpart, you can see the vehicle modes are surprisingly actually near enough the exact same in terms of scale. As we turn here to a side perspective, you can see that the MP version is just a smidge longer than our Deluxe offering, which actually took me by surprise, I will be honest. But you can see, of course, this Legacy version has all of the major design traits that we saw here with the MP release, of course, such as the Skyview window, which I think is really cool. You can see here from the side, I think the stripe detailing looks awesome. And then as we spin here to the back, you can see all of the sculpt work is there for the most part, but it is just missing those details. Of course, this isn't in fact a licensed vehicle, so of course it's slightly more stylized when in comparison to what we're seeing here from the MP release. But once again, very, very surprised in terms of how these actually stack up in terms of scale. And so, some final thoughts for the all-new Transformers Legacy Deluxe class Skids. Overall, I've got to be honest and say to you guys, this is a pretty mediocre figure. It's definitely not one that's going to leave a lasting impression on me. In regards to some of those War for Cybertron offerings, I think personally this pales in comparison. Engineering-wise, it is nowhere near as sophisticated, really harkens back to some of those pre-War for Cybertron figures. Bot mode just has some major design flaws. I have no idea as to why they did in fact greenlight the fact that his head would have that panel permanently stuck behind it. It just looks ridiculous. It really doesn't look great to me. I think the placement of the need to is very ugly, especially when articulating him. The articulation is probably one of the major redeeming factors about that bot mode. He is just as articulated as some of those previous War for Cybertron figures, but in terms of engineering as well as overall aesthetic, I do think he falls slightly short. Not a massive fan of the major hollowness that we've got going on for the legs. I just think that looks super bad. So overall, in terms of bot mode, I'd give that maybe a 5 or a 6 out of 10. Really not up to par with, of course, some of our War for Cybertron figures. Transformation, very simplistic, probably too simplistic for my liking, but results in a fairly accurate looking vehicle mode. I can't complain about the vehicle mode that much. So overall, in terms of recommendation, maybe wait until this guy goes on clearance. There are 2 other figures in this wave which I think are vastly superior, and believe me, we'll be taking a look at those fairly shortly over on the channel, so be sure to stay tuned for them. So Legacy certainly isn't doomed by any stretch of the imagination, but I do just think in terms of expectations for the first offering in this all new lineup, it's definitely not looking as bright as it did when we got that first wave of Siege figures. I'd love to know down in the comment section below on whether or not you guys agree with my thoughts. Do you think that perhaps I'm being way too harsh on this guy? Do you in fact actually find it to be a lot better than I am indeed making it out to be in the review? Are there any redeeming aspects that you find about this figure, or do you completely agree with my opinion? I'd love to know down in the comment section below. As mentioned previously, I've still got so many more Legacy figures to in fact actually get through, so be sure to smash that subscribe button as well as that bell notification so that you guys can be notified as soon as those reviews go up. I thank you all so much for watching, and until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.